Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast, the podcast where we take you through some of the major topics facing importers and manufacturers in China today. Hello everyone, welcome back to China Manufacturing Decoded. This is episode 70 now, and today I'm joined as ever by our CEO, Renaud Anjoran. Renaud, hi.
Hey, hi Adrian. How you doing?
Yes, good, thank you. Good. Yourself?
Yeah, all good. Yeah.
Yeah, we're having a very busy end to the year, aren't we? Lots of stuff going on.
Oh yes. A lot of projects, a lot of developments. Yeah, a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned the word development there, and that does bring us on to today's topic, which is new product development, in particular, some of the deliverables that we're going to be expecting when going through new product development. So this is kind of a more educational one. In this episode, it would be great if you could sort of go through the NPD process in a bit more detail.
Sure. So what I was thinking is from the buyer's side, because if we go through that from the manufacturer side, it's another perspective. I want to just focus on the buyer's side. And let's say you're developing a new product, and at the beginning you do some of the work yourself, thinking of how it would kind of work and what's the expected benefits from the users. You do a little bit of market research. Hopefully you have an idea about what's needed and sort of a theory about how it would work. And then you say, okay, I need to get some drawings, some designs, some things like that. Otherwise, it's really too immature to go straight to a manufacturer. So you work with a design house, an engineering firm. You get, let's say it's a device, hard device, maybe with some electronics. You get an industrial engineer to say, okay, this kind of shape like this would be nice, aesthetically, and it would, allow it to function as you intend. And then you have some engineers to go more into the details of how things would actually work. So I'm not really covering that, because that's really the product development all the way through. You have a working prototype that looks good, that is approved. That's the end of product development. Then you need to industrialize it. You need to bring it into production, and that takes a number of things. And we covered that before in a previous episode about the NPI process, new product introduction process. So what I wanted to cover is, sometimes clients ask me, hey, for example, the latest case, hey, we're working with a lawyer, and we're trying to specify what deliverables, basically what the schedule would be and what the deliverables would be for the for a new product that is being developed. From now until it gets into mass production, we want to keep the risks low. So we want the manufacturer to do a certain number of things, right? And to give us some deliverables from that engineering work, right? So what would it be, and how to structure that? And that's the topic of today, basically.
Okay.
Again, let's say the design files, you work on your side with a design house, with engineers and so on. Of course, you need these files. You need the latest version in your hard drive, if I may say. One of the mistakes that a lot of companies do is they go to China a bit too early. They work with an OEM or ODM manufacturer there, and that manufacturer does some of the engineering for free. But since it's done for free, it is theirs. It is not. They consider that the design drawings and the CAD files, the layout, the schematics, all of this is their property. They should not share it. They can make the product for the buyer, And the buyer should be happy if they already, commit to making it only for the buyer. That's kind of the way of thinking in China. So if you get them to do some work, usually they don't really know how to charge for it, and then they say it's theirs. So of course you need the records about the latest versions of all the engineering documents, let's say, about how to how the product works, the dimensions and so on. And it's not only on the technical side, it's also on the supply chain side. You need to have the bill of material. If you just know, well, this, like, the casing is made of plastic, I guess it's ABS, and the the battery, I don't really know, it's one of their local suppliers, they say, then then basically you know very, very little, next to nothing about your product. And if you're not happy about your manufacturer, when you move to another manufacturer, then the new one has to do all that work again. So that's going to take a long time, and of course increases all kinds of risks, because maybe they cannot get maybe the same finishing, for example, as you were getting from the other supplier, just because you don't know where that component that needs to be nicely finished is finished, and then you lose a lot of the learning. And I know I covered that in previous episodes, but it's always worth mentioning. Okay, so of course you need the design files. If your manufacturer does some of the work on the design files, you need to get them. If they do some work, obviously they have to have a bill of material. Otherwise, how can they go into production? How can they purchase the right parts, the right components, right? So of course they have to have a bill of material. You have to have that. Okay, so that's the first thing to mention. It's pretty obvious, I guess. Then, how deep do you want to go? It depends on a few criteria. If your product is a very high risk product, and of course, medical devices, there's all kinds of regulations about that. There's very little wiggle room here. But let's say it's a non-medical product, but it could put a house on fire. It could hurt people, even lead to death, maybe. Okay. In those cases, you are going to ask for a lot more work upfront to basically show that the risks have been identified and mitigated as much as possible, right? Another key criterion is how, do you expect very high sales or not? Or let's say instead of sales, is there going to be a lot of money involved? Because if you sell your product $100,000, you don't need to sell 1 million of them, right? But let's say, do you expect a lot of money to be involved? Of course, if more money is involved, it's worth it to spend more time, more money upfront to again address the risks. But if you don't really know, if you say, well, we start with the first batch, 100 pieces or 500 pieces, we'll see, and the product is kind of cheap, you can spend a lot of time and money upfront before production. You need to go ahead, do some production, see what's going on, and maybe do some engineering changes, or maybe even go to version 2 if you see that things are catching on nicely. Okay, so let's say that you do want to spend quite a bit of attention because either your product is very risky or a lot of money is going to be at stake. So what are you going to require? And it's helpful to look at what the automotive industry has been doing now for a long time, especially the European and American automotive industry. They have that process for approving the parts, the new parts. It's called the PPAP, Production Part Approval Process. And basically, what it is a list of documents or elements, but it's documents, right? It's document-based deliverables that they require before they authorize a new part, right? Usually for a new vehicle, okay? And obviously a lot of money is at stake, and for some of the parts, the stakes are very, very high. So they're pretty careful about that. It's very structured. So I'm not saying that buyers of general consumer goods, let's say, should follow the same process. Of course not.
Right.
But they have quite a few things, that they can learn from that they can look into. And if we look at what the typical PPAP requires, let's go through these elements. They require risk analysis, again in a very structured way, in the form of an FMEA, failure mode and effect analysis. But let's put that aside for a moment. A risk analysis, looking at the product design before actually approving a prototype. What could go wrong just by looking at the design, just by looking at the prototype. Hey, maybe when they're going to assemble that, there's no way to make sure it's properly assembled, and then it could get disassembled, and that's a big problem. It could be safety related. It could be related to difficulties moving into production. It could be a lot of things, right? Just looking at the design, just to review, it's often possible to come up with a lot of different risks and to analyze them, to see, okay, is this a serious risk that we should really a high risk, basically, should do something about it or not? And if we should do something about it, okay, then let's what is it, and we need to track what has been done, right? And if you work with a serious R&D team, I mean, they've got to do design reviews and risk analysis. It's just not something that can be skipped. So definitely an important element here. And by the way, when it goes into the preparation for production, same thing, same thing. There's again a risk analysis on the processes, the manufacturing and testing processes, right? So same thing. Hey, it's, I don't know, this testing, this critical characteristic has to be tested on 100% of the pieces. Okay, but how to make sure that the bad ones are always caught? And in some cases, you think, well, not all the bad ones are going to get caught the way it's, the way we're thinking about it. So maybe we need to do something else to improve the odds that all the bad parts, will be caught.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not possible to have a perfect control at that stage, and we need to add something later on, maybe on the finished product. All right. That's just an example. Or I don't know. There's going to be paint, and then they say, well, the paint is going to drip a little bit on the corners, and then it's going to give a little bit of a rounder aspect around the corners when it dries. But is this going to have an aesthetic effect? Yes or no? We need to think about that. Boom, that's a risk right here.
Yep.
How to control it. In some cases, it's very hard. So it's very important to let the buyer, the customer, know about that and let them comment on it, right? So these are a few examples, right? Other things that they want to see about the manufacturing process is the process flow chart. So, or flow diagram, as they call it. What actually are the steps going to be, all through production? So, and let's say it's a simple, I don't know, metal part that is going to be machined with a CNC lathe. And okay, well, and it's, that, steel, I don't know, 304. And then you say, well, we got to make sure that, there's going to be incoming QC to make sure it's the right steel, and then there's going to be this CNC machining operation, and after that there's going to be an outgoing inspection on at least on these and these critical specifications, right? These specific dimensions, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Plus maybe a visual check. And it's going to be packed in a simple way and sent to assembly in another factory. Okay, so that sounds very, very simple, but when you start to think about it, things could go wrong. So how do you actually make sure that the finished parts will be acceptable? That leads to another document, usually based on the process flow chart, right? It's the same sort of rows, it's the same steps, but the control plan is a very central document for every step. So you receive let's say the parts in steel, before machining them, what do you do on them? How do you control? Maybe a quick visual check, maybe you require the certain documents from the supplier, and maybe once in a while you do a little bit of testing on it to make sure it's the right material, the right grade of steel, right? Then you do the CNC machining. Okay, how do you make sure it's fine? Well, you need to have some preventive maintenance. You need to change the tool every so often. You need to as it's processing the parts, maybe one every 10 parts or something, you take it as soon as it's machined and you check the critical dimensions, right? These are examples of how to make sure that this process keeps running as it's intended. And then you have the finished parts, then what do you do with them? Then it's an inspection, maybe not 100% of them, but what is the ratio? Or what is the sampling plan, right? You need to define all this. And also a typical control plan will also show, references to maybe what machinery or what fixtures or what tooling is needed. So for example, if you devise a checking fixture to confirm that the finished part is okay, then you're going to mention it there, because that's a really, really important, a piece of tooling here, directly related to quality. And if you have some work instructions, which you should, on how to do the inspections and on how to do the machining, then you should also reference them in the control plan. That is really a central document that brings a lot of these things together. And then when you go into the factory, maybe in the pilot runs or during mass productions, you take the control plan if it exists, and then you walk around and you audit the processes. It's so much easier based on the plan, because they already said these are the steps, so you check if it's correct. These are the work instructions, and then you check if they are there, if it's the right ones, if it's if they're actually followed, if they're up to date. And then it mentions the machinery, the tooling and things like that, and you look at it. And then from there, there's a lot of other things you can look into, of course, right? But that the control plan is really a key deliverable. I always suggest buyers to request that their manufacturer prepares that. Yeah.
So when you devise that plan, is that a dialogue with the manufacturer?
They should be able to do it themselves.
Okay.
If they have no idea what a control plan is, maybe you're working with the wrong people.
Sure.
It's a very central document. Actually, a lot of manufacturers have never heard of a control plan. So be careful who you work with. Right? Then, well, I talked about a checking fixture, for example, or simply, using a caliper to check these parts. Well, how do you make sure that the accuracy is there? You need to have these calibrated or verified. In these cases, calibrated. at a regular interval that makes sense. And you want to have the calibration certificates, but also, especially if there's custom, let's say, testing rigs or custom measuring instruments that are developed just for your product. Very, very important. Okay, how to make sure it's actually accurate, and then you want to look into also precision. So, okay, how to say it in a simple way? You want to make sure that if I take that instrument and I measure the part, then I give the same part to you and the same instrument, you're going to find the same results or very close. And if there's several instruments involved, then also we use different instruments. We should also find something, a result that's pretty close. Okay, and that's usually called measurement system analysis. There can be a lot to it, but doing some of the basics about what I just mentioned, reproducibility and repeatability of the gauges, that's very important. Again, if you really want to make sure that your critical components are up to the task, right? Yeah, on the critical dimensions. And then they do their own inspections, and it should all be within tolerance if possible. Otherwise, they should have an action plan and show, explain why it's not within tolerance, and so on and so forth. Now, in some industries, and typically in the auto industry, for the critical dimensions, they go further. They don't just want it to be within tolerance. They want to make sure that your process is stable and is within control. Okay, and one of the classic basic tools for that is the capability index. CP, CPK. Basically, they measure for every critical dimension that is measured how close to the target the production really is, and and let's say how far away from the upper and lower specification limits. Like, basically, if you have a CPK of, let's say, 1.33, you have a relatively high confidence that, most of the parts are going to be within tolerance. Like, it's kind of relatively safe, pretty safe, I would say, especially for consumer goods. It's already pretty good. So if you request that you do some of these analysis, there are test reports, measurement reports, I should say, and a little bit of statistical analysis, and you should request that and see, if that looks nice. So, and then you should also, now that's something really important, they cannot go directly into mass production, right? We also discussed that before about, the importance of a pilot run and so on. So you want them to explain to you, okay, what are you going to do prior to mass production? Are you going to do just one pilot run, and how many pieces, and what exactly are you going to try to validate there? And if for consumer electronics that have to be made in the hundreds of thousands or even more, there's at least three different kinds of validation runs, right? There's what they call engineering validation testing, design validation testing, and then production validation testing. And every time they have different objectives, right? So engineering validation testing, basically, okay, let's get the parts off tooling. Let's put them together. Let's see how it all works. And, the finishing of the product might not be perfect yet and things like that. But this comes in the next one, the design validation testing, where they really want to make sure that, yeah, it can be assembled properly and it works and so on, but also it has to look nice and feel nice. And then, of course, through these first 2 pilot runs, you look at, hey, well, how is it going to work in mass production? Any potential issues? But really, the production validation testing, the latest one, PVT, is about, okay, let's put it on the in an assembly line, and let's do everything all throughout, not just in assembly, of course, but also especially for the custom parts that have been designed just for your product. Let's do everything like it's going to be in mass production. Let's be as close as possible to it. Actually, let's do it exactly the same. PVT has to be exactly the same. The same people, same equipment, same testing instruments, same methods, everything. And let's see, if we can make it at the right quality level. And let's see, how, where are the bottlenecks? Let's see how fast it can be made. Basically, what are the issues? And then we fix the issues one by one. It's really getting into production. And there might be several PVT runs for complex products. It's actually quite normal, right? So you need to ask your supplier, okay, what are you going to do once tooling is made, before you launch mass production? And a bad supplier will say, oh, we don't need to do anything special. We'll just go direct into mass production. Well, and we talked about that before, right?
Yeah.
About pilot runs, but that is a big red flag. And if your product comes with high risk or a lot of money is going to be involved, you absolutely cannot accept that, right? Okay, so you ask your supplier, you set up a plan with them, you see what deliverables will come out of these validation runs. And obviously there should be, inspection reports and things like that. Things like also maybe process studies, maybe, good manufacturers will look at how balanced the lines are. They will look at how much scrap there is and what are the sources of this. They will do an analysis, of course, of the defectives that are found and where they come from. They will feed back all of that to the different suppliers of components and follow up on that. There can be a lot of work in there. Okay. What else? There might be engineering changes that have to be approved by all parties, and this absolutely has to be documented, obviously. And this usually comes. It might come actually during the pre-production runs, when we see, okay, there are some issues here, and there has to be a very clear process. It's not just, okay, we make this change on the drawing, we tell the supplier, and then they resend some parts with, on the right dimensions or something like that. Or we change the firmware a little bit, we tell the PCBA guys to load the new version of the firmware, and then, let's go ahead with that. If you go with this kind of attitude, you're going to have, very serious failures, and you will not even know where they come from. No. It has to be very, very carefully thought of, and all the testing has to be updated, and the specifications and things like that where needed. That definitely leads to documents, deliverables that as the buyer you really want to follow up on that, right? Obviously, prototypes, tooling samples, pre-production samples, all of that, the buyer, receives them and comments on them and keeps them, or some of them, as the master sample to really illustrate the quality standard. That's pretty clear. And of course, the approved quality standard document should be ready by the end of product development. If you go into production without that, you might go into a lot of discussions with your supplier, right?
Mm.
And yeah, I guess I covered most of the main topics here.
Yeah. So to summarize, what you've been going through is more when we're getting towards the manufacturing stage rather than the R&D stage of a new product.
Yes. Yeah. R&D will give you, all the drawings, the layouts, schematics, and so on. Sourcing will give you the bill of material, and then once you have all of this confirmed, then you move into production. And moving into production is not as simple and straightforward as people often think.
Right.
There are a lot of steps,
Yeah.
and there should be a lot of validation steps and verification. Yeah, like you have some finished products, you check them against the specs. That's verification. Whereas validation is, well, let's put that on the lines. Let's see how it works. Let's see how things come out. Let's send it to users. Let's see if they like it. That's called validation in the proper quality jargon.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a lot of these steps, green light, red light, basically. And all of this should be documented. And the buyer should, request all of that. Again, for projects where there are high risks involved or a lot of money involved.
Right. And yeah, you gave the benchmark, which was the auto industry. I guess industries like medical, aerospace as well, where a part failing could lead to, loss of life. Let's imagine it's the brakes on a car, and it's an integral part to those. If anyone listening is thinking, well, my product is not going to be that serious, all of the deliverables that you've just gone through, I mean, how critical is it that they focus on those?
So, yeah, as you say, you need to focus on critical parts in priority, and you don't want to request all of that. What I requested, what I outlined. Sorry. In great details. So yeah, focus, of course, on the critical parts first, but things like the control plan or the risk analysis should look at everything, basically.
Well, it makes sense because fundamentally, by doing all of this quite sort of comprehensive checking, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to get great quality and safe products once you do go into mass production.
Well, that's really the end goal.
The name of the game.
Yes, that you have mass production coming out at the right quality, on the right, without delays, basically without surprises. The surprises are always costly.
Yeah.
And surprises, I mean, how many of our clients have, told us, oh, we missed the Christmas season just because this supplier, messed up. And then we start to ask questions, and yes, the supplier messed up. I mean, no argument about that. But the customer also messed up because they did not have a structured process. They did not guide the manufacturer on what to do.
Right. Yes, and that's why we're discussing this today. So yeah, that's so going through those deliverables. That's a really, really good guide to anyone who is sort of starting to go through the new product development process.
Yep.
You've mentioned a number of times, for example, we've spoken about pilot runs in the past on the podcast. Please do check the show notes if you want to catch up with those. I'll add the links to some of those related podcast episodes that we already recorded, and you can go into even more detail by listening to those. But until next time, Renaud, thanks for going through all of that for us.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to like and share, and you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other places that you get your podcasts from. See you next time.